Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tips, tools, and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Welcome back, everyone. Today I have guest Dr. Nathan Riley. Nathan is a board-certified OB-GYN, founder of Beloved Holistics, and host of the Holistic OB-GYN podcast. His mission is to honor birth as a sacred process and the transition to parenthood as a spiritual transformation. Nathan empowers women to have babies on their own terms, using nature as their guide. He helps fathers embrace the opportunity to connect with their partners during all stages of pregnancy, birth, and parenting. Nathan is a triathlete, the father of two, and is proudly married to his high school sweetheart. Welcome, Nathan. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
It's great to see you face to face, Tanya. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you and I, we're going to dive into the sacred practice of midwifery, empowering women to give birth on their own terms. And so, Nathan, you were working in a hospital setting, and then you decided to focus more of your time on the traditional practice of midwifery. And you were an advocate for home birth. And on your website, something actually caught my eye. It said, instead of changing the system, I'm supporting the creation of a new one. And when I worked in healthcare, I felt very strongly about that as well, specific to the way that we share information with grieving families, because that was kind of my niche. And so, yeah, Nathan, what guided you to leave the more Western or conventional way of hospital birthing care to help women and their partners explore a more alternative option at home?
Well, I think that first off, I was fired 3 times during COVID, so I didn't really have a choice. But the other part of that is that while I was in the system, I was like totally unemployable. I didn't want to follow the rules that were set down for me by older physicians, meaning my superiors, by the administrative staff, by the director of nursing, by the CEO, the president of the hospital, whatever. They would even call me up and say, hey, how's it going in the new job? And it's like, I don't even want to talk to this person. You're not a clinician. You have no idea what medical school even entails. You're just calling a meeting and sandwiching a criticism between 2 slices of bread that are like artificial emotional fluffing, you know?
And they're looking at the top dollar, really, and I totally hear where you're coming from. It's like, hey, why don't you become boots on the ground here and see what's really going on,
That's exactly right. And for anybody out there, if you're employed by somebody, there's nothing wrong with having a job, guys, I promise. But you are renting out your time at the minimum wage that they're willing to pay you in order to maximize their profit. We have to just bear that in mind. That is what, effectively, that is capitalism in a nutshell. Maybe we can survive without it. Maybe we can't. It doesn't matter. It wasn't for me. I needed to be my own person. And this is especially relevant for my 2 specialties. I've got 2 board specialties. One is, and by the way, guys, there's a little girl here who's not going to be chattering the whole time because mom just got home. But anyways, my 2 board specialties are in end-of-life care, hospice and palliative medicine, as well as obstetrics and gynecology. So I've got these 2 very sacred things that I've been entrusted with by the people who are, seeking medical care, so to speak. We see death and dying as a disease as much as we see birth. And birth is not a disease, or pregnancy is not a disease, and birth is not a medical procedure. We see death sort of like a failure of the medical sciences. Like, we can't keep them alive any longer, therefore we must let them go. No, they were dying, and we didn't honor that. It wasn't very dignified how we managed it. And yes, it's sad to lose babies, moms, dads, our grandparents. It is always sad to lose a patient. But that's not because I failed at what I was doing. Yet I was being treated as if, hey, if you aren't able to keep this person alive for 30 more seconds, then you didn't do your job well or something. So at the end of the day, I had to figure out what I wanted to do. And I ended up deciding just to leave the whole thing completely and start my own sort of brand of medicine. And that's the system.
I call us ones that buck the system, because I was the same way. I worked in organ donation and transplantation, and I can see where you're coming from with that failure. And so there, a lot of it was, our team having to help the physicians and the staff move through the grief of the loss of their patients just as much as the families. And there was such a disconnect with communication. And I'm sure that takes place on the birthing side. I didn't really see much of that, you know, in the area that I worked, because I worked a lot more around death and loss. But I got to a point where it was just, it felt very businesslike. It felt very routine. There was a disconnect between the compassion that I wasn't seeing that. And I could see the staff crumbling all around me. Everyone was just struggling with such compassion fatigue, burnout to infinite levels. I mean, it wasn't even just a little bit. I mean, this was taking it full throttle. And Nathan, I wasn't even in there during COVID. I can only imagine what that whole scenario was like. And so, you know, I had a death doula on the show last week. So I want to talk about that. What is a birthing doula and what's the difference between that? I had never heard of the concept of a death doula. I didn't even know that was a thing. And so I want us to talk about doulas and midwives and all these other options that women or families have to birth a child or bring a child into this world that doesn't have to be at your conventional hospital.
Yeah, it's funny that we even need to have a title for a doula. I mean, what we're talking about is basic human decency. At the end of life, that might consist of somebody just being there with you, maybe not even talking. Maybe you don't even know that they're there, but they're just being there. That's called holding space. It's a very active process to not try to intervene in something. And when I use the word intervene, that's kind of a loaded term. In birth, that might mean that we're shooting you up with drugs or pushing your labor along more quickly. Basic human decency is sort of lacking, I think, in the way that we've created a commodity out of healthcare. You know, there's nobody incentivizing you as a medical resident when you're learning the craft of healing. Nobody's incentivizing the amount of, you know, for you to spend more time with your client. And I don't say patient because when you're pregnant, you don't have a disease. You're not a sick person. And in many regards, like in Northern Idaho, people don't go to the hospital to have babies because they're not sick. You know, a hospital is there in case you get hit by a car or you're stabbed in the throat.
Acute care.
Yeah, acute care is something Western medicine does way better than any other modality. For everything,
everybody's acute care the moment you walk into the hospital.
Yeah, suddenly now there's this like implication that you are the danger is around the corner, right? So the purpose of a death doula, the purpose of a birth doula is really for you to be witnessed. That's all that is. Now, the birth doulas have also taken on the role now of advocacy, and some of the death doulas as well. Hey, this is what their advance directive says. They don't have anybody else here. I got to know this person really well. Maybe we should consider X, Y, and Z. You know, there is a little bit of advocacy there, but in birth work, we have become so challenged by this medical industrial complex that advertises this sort of elusive safety that most people who go there feel like they're not really being honored. Their wishes aren't really being honored. And if they bring a birth plan, they're being kind of scoffed at, laughed at. All of that stuff is a good reason to have a doula, but a real doula is just somebody who's bearing witness to what you're going through. It's like having a best friend in your corner when you're going through one of the most extraordinary experiences of your life. So I personally think that everybody could benefit from a doula, whether it's at birth or at the end of life. And the additional thing I'll say is that these are the two most sacred rites of passage. This is where we actually need to be witnessed the most.
I agree.
So, yeah.
And I know, you know, what I was seeing was that even on the death side, palliative care was trying to do the best that they could, but there was only so many of them to be able to do that. And so, you know, there were many times I sat at the bedside while people took their last breath or crossed over. So technically I could have been that death doula at that moment, holding space for someone. And so, you know, when we look at our society, birthing and death, it's happening to all of us, right? And those are the two areas that we're so depleted in, and we aren't honoring. We actually treat our pets better than we treat humans sometimes in the hospitals, right? And so it's hard, especially for me. I was highly empathic and I was picking up on all of the needs of the family, those crossing over, the staff, and it was just, there wasn't enough to give, you know, and I'm sure that that's what you were probably picking up on as well from the birthing side of that. And so let's dive into what is a midwife, and, let's talk a little bit about that. And, maybe there's some misconceptions out there about midwifery, and let's dive into that, Nathan.
Yeah. I mean, the big question is, so I'm an OB. I've attended thousands of births. I don't even know how many, honestly. It's like, how many times have you
That's
had
how I felt with death. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't know, a lot. Like, there's been a lot of births that I've been right there for, watching a baby come out through the portal and this person
Really
become
cool.
a mother. I mean, or a father. I mean, it's pretty awesome stuff. Um, but the big question for most people is, how on earth could I have honored my wife's wishes to have a home birth for a second? So we had a baby in our bedroom. The whole labor was like less than 2 hours, and we were doing a style of breath work when the baby emerged. Like, it was a very uh for me, it was like sheer ecstasy. It was like how I hope everybody can feel that happy at some point in their life, because it wasn't just joy, it was this like exaltation, just an incredible feeling. So
That DMT
people,
kicking in.
oh my God, yeah. And like, they're on their own little acid trip, and we're all on our little oxytocin acid trip. I mean, it's wild. So when people know that about me, they're like, "How?" That's why people call me the heretic of birth and death. Like, I love that little moniker, because it's exactly right. It is heresy for an OB-GYN to honor a home birth. When I was in training, the midwives, people having home births, people having free births, they were like, how irresponsible could you be? And so I started
I
going to
even
home
had a
births.
friend say that to me this past weekend, because one of her friends had a home birth, and it was like, oh, she had a home birth. And I'm like, I probably know more people that have had home births than
Yeah.
hospital births,
Yeah.
really.
At this point, that's my whole social network. I don't know anybody that I'm good friends with who's choosing to have a home birth. I mean, I'm sorry, a hospital birth. They're all trying to have a home birth or at a birth center, which are both considered out of hospital. And then sometimes it doesn't matter how well you prepare. Sometimes you just have to transfer to the hospital, and that's okay. You tried your home birth experience, it didn't work, or even your free birth experience, which is no birth attendance, it didn't work, and you moved to the hospital. Big deal, not a failure.
Did you
Um,
see a shift during COVID of more home births than
way,
hospital births?
way
Did you
more.
see that?
Yeah, there was actually far less people going to their OB-GYN's clinics, because they weren't permitted to be in the waiting rooms. Like, they weren't even offering the opportunity to go to the clinic.
Mhm.
And this is in a very, very stark contrast with what we're used to seeing in OB-GYN care, where you're going to the doctor every 2 to 4 weeks for the entire pregnancy, and they're getting the ultrasound, they're doing the urine stuff, they're asking about all these questions. And now nobody's going there, and it's not like we had a bunch of babies dying. If anything, we saw an increase in the miscarriage rates due to the thing that was rolled out and that everybody was really confused about. But of course, none of that data is great, and it really doesn't matter. The
And
point
it'll
is,
be 10 plus years before that stuff rolls out,
if
if
that,
it
yeah,
does.
maybe
Mhm.
50 years, who knows? So we won't get into that and get you kicked off YouTube.
Yeah, let's
As
keep
you
it
can
let's keep
imagine.
it semi-clean, Nathan, because I know you and I are on the same page.
I'm sure. Yeah. So anyways, during that time though, people like us, we were sort of forced to reconcile this issue. Do we go in and get swabbed? And then maybe if one of us is positive, are we able to take the baby home? Like, all of this stuff while we're
Oh my
actively in
goodness.
this
Mhm.
sacred process of having a baby. And a lot of people ended up deciding there was like the push they needed to have the home birth. And of course, nothing went wrong. And they're now telling their stories. So we're actually seeing an upsurge of that. But even despite that, when I was in training and all this stuff, people just thought it was so irresponsible. And the question I always pose is, okay, if you think it's safer to have a hospital birth, then you have to ask yourself, safe for who? Is it safe for the person who might get sued if something goes bad? Is it safe based on the emotional stability of the hospital staff and their inability to reconcile a bad outcome that they had, like you've seen as a nurse, in that setting? You have a person die, and you see them have CPR, and you don't ever want that person or anybody to have to see a person go through CPR again. It is a
No.
traumatic thing.
Or even withdrawal of
So
life support. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, and especially if it's really, really like uncomfortable, like they're maybe gagging or
Which
coughing or
most of the
choking.
time it was. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you're like, let's just double that diazepam. Like, let's just load them up with some extra. Let's throw 3 benzos in there. Let's add some extra propofol. Let's just
Make it
snowball
comfortable.
them.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So
Got some
we
Kevorkian. Yeah. Yeah. I'm
it
all
sounds
about
kind of
that.
Kevorkian, yeah.
Mhm.
And when you see a traumatic, what you might perceive as a traumatic death, you want to be able to help in some way. And the hospital staff is doing just they're acting on what they've seen. But what I would really conjecture you to say is to consider if you're questioning this home birth versus hospital birth thing or midwife versus OB is that if a woman who's having a baby does not feel witnessed, does not feel safe inside, not like there's the buildings on fire. I mean, like something inside of you feels unsettled about the environment, the sterility, the disruptions, the beeping, the needle sticks,
Oh, it's
whatever,
highly
highly disruptive.
overwhelming. Hmm.
Yeah, that actually disrupts the beautiful cascade, this hormonal and this neurochemistry that leads to the ejection of your baby. So the fact that we have a third of babies coming out by C-section is a reflection of just how disruptive that hospital environment is. And there's nothing safe about a C-section. It's only safe in our country because we do way too many of them, as there are in many other developed nations. So in the hospital, we have all these interventions. This cascade of interventions leads to situations in which we, the heroes, have to run out and do emergency surgery. And then we say, look, thank God you were in the hospital. But you probably wouldn't even been on that path had you been at home, comfortable in a tub with warm water, drinking some lemonade with your, Netflix
And some nice
or
frequencies on in the background.
yeah,
Something
right. Like a
relaxing. Mhm.
diffuser, some nice music, some amber lights, like whatever. You might just be safer and more sound in your home. And that leads to the lack of necessity for a lot of these things that people, hail the medical system for. So I could go on that topic for ages. The last thing I'll add is that midwives have better training in resuscitating babies than doctors do.
That's what I was
Period.
going to ask. What does that certification look like for a midwife?
Every couple years you go and you do a course. It's about a 4 to 5 hour course. You practice on mannequins. You get like your basic life support, like the CPR stuff on an adult mannequin, and then you actually help to resuscitate a baby. There's like a basic level, and then those of us who attend birth, we go through a much more regimented, sort of sophisticated training where we actually, will be giving oxygen sometimes, or even giving pressurized breaths to the baby. We know how to monitor how is the baby doing based on just what we have available there. We don't need sharp needles and all that. There's the sort of beauty of a really good physical exam and whatnot that midwives are just so much more elegantly trained to do, versus sound the alarms. This baby's grunting a little bit, and then the baby ends up getting all this stuff in it, and it's in the NICU for no reason. And it's like, and the mom and dad are like, can I be with my baby? And they're like, we should just keep an eye on it for 7 more years in this NICU. to
Yeah.
make
So,
sure
well, and I know too, there's a monetary reason for that on the back end as well, which is really sad,
That's
to say.
unfortunate, but I suspect that there is on the NICU side. I don't think many neonatologists are getting paid. I think it's the hospital
It's
that's
the
actually
hospitals.
setting those policies. Yeah, so
Mhm.
we should be clear about that. But the same goes for OB-GYNs. You don't get more money for doing more C-sections.
No.
Um, it's more of an efficiency thing sometimes and a fear of liability and also the culture of the practice of your colleagues. If
Mhm.
you do things differently from the other 5 doctors that you're working with, they're just going to find somebody to replace you. You're not that important.
It's true. And, top of the line is its length of stay. That was huge when I was working at the hospital. They would always be talking about length of stay and can we turn over this bed? And, working with an organ donor, we could be in there for anywhere from a day to 7, depending on how long we have to
Oh
maintain
yeah.
the
Well, like a
function. And
liver
so
transplant, I mean, they might be in there for weeks. Like this is
exactly.
a
And so that
high
brain dead
morbidity.
donor, they wanted to turn it around quickly, but we were always advocating for the family as well, and so, but that length of stay was big, because they were making money off of that
Yeah,
and they aren't
yeah.
making money off of someone who's brain dead.
Oh, I mean, yeah, you're totally right. Yeah. But yeah, I remember when I still was in the hospital system. I remember every single day in the staff lounge, like the doctors, the nurse practitioners, the APRNs, they call them, all of the providers, which is a business term. Everybody, you are a midwife, own it, be a midwife. You're a nurse practitioner, own it, be a nurse practitioner. You're a physician, own it. RN, own it. You're a fucking nurse. That is awesome. Be a nurse.
You went through a lot of schooling to get there.
Yeah, yeah. And you spend more time with our patients than anybody. It's so awesome that you're a nurse. Thank God you're a nurse.
We need
Um,
you.
but anyways, in these lounges, they would always have a poster up there, and I think they had like it was like a whiteboard, so they could change the number to say what our census was at on a daily basis. And it was always to encourage everybody in there to get their patients out of the hospital.
Yeah. Hmm.
Doesn't matter if you're better or not. Let's just give them their meds and get them out the door, because we're not going to make any more money on them if we're just
It's sad.
managing
And
their
Nathan, guess how many? We had several donors that people would get pushed out of the hospital and they'd have a heart attack in the parking lot and ended up resulting in a donation. And it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. And so, and I guess you and I, it's like we're seeing both sides of the spectrum here, the birthing and the death process. I'm wondering, when you're in that, you're going through the birthing process, you're in that fight, flight, or freeze response, whether you're doing it at home or you're doing it at the hospital. I'm curious what the statistics look like of the children's, nervous system after they're born, because if you're, like you said, in the hospital, you've got all these buzzers, and those drove me crazy. I actually watched a doctor. He had a traumatic brain injury prior. He was a neurologist, and he had his own TBI. Well, when those buzzers went off, I watched him rip the phone off the wall and throw it down the hallway because it was obviously activating those responses with inside of him. And there were many times I thought about doing that. I'm like, just turn those buzzers off. So, what do you know about that? Opposed to hospital setting, just the stimulation that the mother and the baby get, what does that look like from a home birth to a hospital setting?
I think with what we know, and I'm going to answer your question in a bit of a roundabout way, because I actually think it's worse than that. It's worse than just the beeps and the bright lights and, all this artificial, all the artificial light, but also the other stressors, the environmental stressors of the bad drinking water, the really crappy hospital food.
The radiation. Yeah.
The radiation. Yeah. I mean, this hospital, in addition to all of those things, is so high wired that it's like literally vibrating. Like there is an electrical pulse coming from this hospital. And every moment that you're in there, whether you're in the operating room, you're trying to get sleep in the call room, you're down eating, you're having a baby, you're actively dying, you're being blasted with electromagnetic radiation. And it doesn't matter if you believe it or not. It's not a belief system, guys. It is absolutely dangerous to be blasted with that stuff all day. Like there's no show me the evidence. I don't need evidence. It is not natural for you to be sitting in a microwave at all times, period. So having said that, I think that it's especially important that we consider, if you close your eyes and you imagine having a baby, what would you like that environment to be like? And most people are not conjuring images up of a, starchy gown with an uncomfortable transformer bed and
steel bed. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all the stuff that you experience in a hospital, not to mention anything that we just talked about. So when I was still attending births in the hospital, I would like turn all the lights off. We'd have one light, a headlamp, maybe even on me. And I would just have it on. And if they wanted lights, they could have them on. But most people just want to like go inward because we don't want to activate the brain. We don't want to, we don't want to activate that fear response. We know in the mammal world that when you activate the catecholamine system, that a mammal, their labor will stop completely. And it's because of this sort of tension between the oxytocin, which pushes labor forward, and catecholamines, which sort of suppress it. It makes sense on the savannah. A lioness would want to hold her labor to get to safety if she heard something rustling in the woods. We're not immune to that. And so most people would imagine lower lights and softer touch and softer voices and little ASRM sort of,
Yeah, I love that stuff.
And that allows them to just be still. It's very, very hard to do that in a hospital setting, despite my efforts. There's just a lot of protocols and policies that make that impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, what are some of the complications that could happen at home birth? What happens if the umbilical cord's wrapped around the neck? These are questions, like I said, I've never had children, but these might be questions that the listeners or watchers have. Nathan, can you walk us through, those things? Because those are things that could create fear.
Yeah, anything that can happen in a hospital can happen at home, which is what I think most people are afraid of. But let's start there. So without any interventions imposed, you could have an unmedicated birth in the hospital, an unmedicated birth at home. Chances are things are going to go well. 85% of the time, if not greater, are just going to go fine. As soon as you start adding in those interventions in the hospital, like I mentioned, you actually increase the likelihood of the scariest things happening. In other words, I'll use one example, which is let's say, okay, let's use Pitocin. So Pitocin is the synthetic version of oxytocin, which is the love hormone, by the way, everybody. Oxytocin governs over orgasm, over conception, over the fetal ejection reflex after long periods of surges that are bringing your baby out through the pelvis. It governs over that bonding between you and your baby, as well as the milk letdown reflex. Oxytocin, this love hormone, is everywhere, and your baby can be flooded with that at home. In the hospital, unfortunately, for all the reasons we've talked about, you have a bit of suppression of the effects of this beautiful hormone. And we like to add a fake version of that, which does stimulate the uterus, but it doesn't do any of the other magical things that the love hormone does. So the other downside of using high doses of oxytocin in a continuous way, as opposed to this pulsatile way that you might see in childbirth, is that your uterus actually becomes a little bit tired after a while.
Oh, wow.
So you're on Pitocin, this synthetic oxytocin, which, hey, it's no different. It's no different, guys. Well, they end up in the operating room, or they end up having their baby vaginally. I mean, like a C-section or vaginally, and their uterus is just so tired that it can't clamp down on itself.
Wow.
And now we have to do all the life-saving things that I taught, that I won't get into. At home, you can have that. You can have a hemorrhage, in which case it is helpful that you have, if you have a hospital nearby, within 20, 30 minutes, ideally. When we had a home birth, we had one that was like 2 miles away. That's great in case that happens. But the likelihood of that happening is way less than in the hospital because of all the things we've already talked about. So the bottom line is that having a free birth is the most extreme pole. Having a very, very medicalized hospital birth is on the other end of that pole. And it's everywhere, everything in between, birth centers, midwife, all of that, really that big gray area is where you have to decide, what is your tolerance for risk? How willing are you to accept that maybe something catastrophic happens and we don't have somebody to help us? The chances are low, but it's also low that you'd be in a car accident. What are we going to do if we end up submerged in our car and we can't break our window? Some people carry like little mallets under their seats so they can bash the window. We don't have one. So we've decided that we're going to take that chance. This is really where radical responsibility and autonomy and informed consent are very, very important for you to understand. What are you getting into here? Are you willing to accept that hospital 2 hours away might be too far to save you and your baby? Yeah. And some people may still say that's okay for me.
A risk I'll take.
Yeah. And most of the things, like you mentioned, the cord wrapped around that, that's actually not an emergency. That is maybe up to 40% of babies in my practice, they have a cord around the neck when they come out. It's not a big deal. They just come through and it untangles and it's fine. The most likely scenario is you haven't had your blood pressures checked, or and you have something called preeclampsia, and you're going to end up seizing or stroking out because your pressures are way too high and nobody was checking or looking. So we didn't know to bring them down. That's probably the most scary situation, because if you have a hemorrhagic stroke, as you know, you're not going to get better.
Results in a not so great. Yeah.
That and hemorrhage are probably the two major things that people really have to worry about. The baby not doing well afterwards. If you have a midwife there, you probably are going to be just fine. Of course, babies still die, but it would, I would argue that
babies die in the hospital too. Yeah,
that's right. There are some babies that simply are not fit enough for birth, and that is so hard for us to accept. We want that number to be 0 because it's so tragic when a baby is lost. But there are certain circumstances in which a baby just wasn't going to survive anyways.
Yeah.
We like to blame the person who made the choice. They exercise their autonomy. We like to blame the midwife, like what a stupid, negligent old wife she is, I have never had that experience with a midwife where they've been incompetent or incapable of caring for somebody in an emergency situation, whether it's a baby that's head's entrapped with a breech, or a shoulder's caught somewhere, or there's a massive hemorrhage or whatever. I mean, midwives really, really know what they're doing. So this is usually a big part of my counseling within my practice, is like, we have to get into the weeds here and really feel out, what are your fears? What is the thing you're afraid of happening?
Yeah. Because there's a lot of fear around birthing, there's a lot of fear around being pregnant, and a lot of fear that things could go wrong. And I think, but us as modern society, we've been programmed to think the only way to give birth is at a hospital,
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the media hasn't helped us out here. Our 3-letter organizations and 4-letter organizations have not helped us out. It is what happened over the past couple of years was very hard to watch because, you know, for years we've been growing this, the public, I should say, has grown a distrust of the medical establishment, the medical industrial, or some people call it the medical military industrial complex,
Yeah. Hmm.
um, which, you know, you could argue with what happened over the last couple of years that may be true. Um, and now what we saw happen was the people that we've elected into office and the people that we've sort of entrusted with giving us the guidelines and the greatest information, both as the public and as clinicians who have gone all through all this school, they've really let us down. They shot at themselves in the feet. And now we're kind of on our own. If you're really out there looking for the best evidence or trying to discern truth versus untruth,
Yeah. Hmm.
you're kind of on your own, and that has not made it easier for pregnant people or their partners to make decisions. I can say that for sure.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I had a few friends who were pregnant in COVID, and I said, I would not sign up for that. That is, that would not be for me. But had I known someone like you, it would have been a totally different scenario. But, so are there any things that you would say to a mother, who's pregnant, that you would say you're not an option for home birthing? Is there anything that would come up, for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there, believe it or not, the people that I won't attend in birth are two types of people. One is a true vegan. I will not attend their home birth. And I'll explain that in a second. The other is somebody who hasn't taken responsibility for the controllable factors in their pregnancy. So if you're going to have a home birth, if you're going to have a free birth, whatever, you need to really dial in your health. All of the bad stuff that we've been talking about, all the gestational diabetes, the hypertensive disorders, preeclampsia, a lot of the biggest issues in pregnancy that lead to these catastrophic losses and bad outcomes are, let's not call them bad outcomes. Let's call them dead moms and dead babies.
Mm-hmm.
That's the worst thing on everybody's mind. The 99% of the time, it was a condition that could have been prevented, but doctors are not trained in any way, shape, or form to take care of a person as a means of preventing these things from happening.
Preventative care, yeah.
Yeah, we all say it runs in the family. Well, okay, but it's not just your genes. It's also how you've been living your life. There's been some pretty solid evidence that shows that even if you have friends in your social network who are overweight, that you will also be, obese. So it is really very, very much who you're hanging out with and how you're treating your body. How are you loving yourself through this pregnancy? And even before conception, at least 3 months is what I tell people. 4 months, actually, 120 days. Get this dialed in, because I am not willing to accept responsibility in caring for you, because inevitably somebody's going to say he was the problem. Like, I just won't do it. You are the highest risk people if you're vegan or you're not taking care of yourself. Do you mind if I spin on the veganism
Let's
thing?
talk about the vegan aspect, because there could be people out there saying, hey, wait, I thought I was doing well,
Yeah. And I mean, veganism is probably very good for a lot of people for a variety of reasons. But when you're growing a baby, that baby's going to survive at the cost of your nervous system, your bones, all of the minerals and vitamins that your body needs elsewhere. Your baby's going to take that for his or herself. Now, the reason that I don't recommend veganism is not theoretical. Every time that I've attended a vegan birth, and I can count 12, I was counting them.
You don't recommend it in general? You just don't recommend it during pregnancy?
Personally, I don't recommend it at all. But if you're going to get pregnant, this is the time now to break your veganism. Like, whether it's ethical or otherwise, you've got to get some animal products, because there's a variety of nutrients there that are important not only to grow your baby, but actually to care for your own body tissues. So what has happened in every single vegan birth that I've attended, and I started noticing this in residency. This isn't like a fabrication. Yeah, it was just a trend. Because very few people are truly vegan. Like, some people are like, I eat fish and once in a while, and that's great. That's all that I'm asking. But if you're not eating any animal products, there's not any number of supplements that can make up for the lack of vitamin K2, real folate that you can actually absorb, iron, heme iron, L-arginine, taurine, like these types of, and I'm just listing a couple, these types of nutrients are so critical to your own health and your baby's health. Choline's another great one. And you can't get them in the abundance that you need them from plants. Doesn't mean you can't get them from plants. It means that you're not going to be able to utilize vitamin K in the form of K1 because it hasn't been converted to K2. Mm-hmm. Likewise, if you have an MTHFR, which is a specific gene variation or mutation that 40 to 60% of the population carries, you can't utilize folic acid. You have to be eating folate.
Folate.
And folate comes from organ meats. That is the most abundant source. Liver. So you get your liver encapsulated. I mean, Idaho, you guys have plenty of elk and everybody hunts.
Yeah,
the liver is the
There's plenty of food sources here.
Yeah. I mean, you get the liver, you get the heart, you get the spleen, and you have as many nutrients as you could ever want in your, the rest of your year. So, anyways, what I started noticing with vegans was not really an issue with the baby, because I feel like the babies parasitically kind of just take from the mother what they need.
Exactly.
Sounds pretty gnarly, but it makes sense. Evolution.
It reminds me of Bella on Twilight, and she's pregnant.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
siphoned.
they're little siphons, they're little vampires, and we love them for that because actually, if you are doing your best to take care of yourself, your baby's going to do even better.
Yeah.
If you aren't eating enough animal products, which includes proteins, a wide variety of essential fatty acids like the omega-3s, which are most abundant in the fatty parts of cows and fish, you're not. What I was noticing is that when the baby comes out, their tissues were shearing, like tearing apart.
Wow.
Versus a very stretchy, elastic,
collagen,
good skin turgor. Yeah, I mean, the pelvis itself is so elastic from collagen and all of these sort of fluid-filled compounds that allow this elasticity. But the tissue itself, I was noticing, was kind of like a diabetic's tissues.
Wow.
Where you couldn't even suture it together. It would the needle would just pull through, like tear through. So the actual, so I started noticing that the actual robustness of the tissues was lacking in veganism. So that translated to virtually everything else that happens in the body. I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to attend a home birth if you're vegan. The placentas end up pooping out. Like but the placenta is like this big, beautiful mass of almost like a big liver. And their placentas would just fall apart with gravity. It was like, whoa, what is happening here? This is not good. So, apart from me beating those two groups of people up, if you have
all out there, we aren't here to hurt you.
yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to encourage people to consider getting a couple animal products, maybe some eggs, maybe some organ meat capsules that comes from a farmer down the road that it really is really respectful of the cows. Whatever it is, it's going to benefit your pregnancy through and through. But some other reasons I wouldn't attend are if you have two twins that are inside the same bag with the same placenta. It's called monochorionic, monoamniotic. I wouldn't attend them because they can actually get tangled up if you try to attend them at home, or if you try to to attend to them coming through the vagina.
Yeah.
And if they have really severe range blood pressures, I would want them to be in the hospital because, as we can give IV medicines to rapidly drop your blood pressure. If you have a seizure, if you need airway protection, we can do all of that there. But, I've mentioned a couple. There's very, very few instances in which I would say that's an absolute no for me.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask that question because there could be people out there who are considering this. And if they're in the, within those areas that you just talked about, they may want to reconsider, just reconsider, how their plan of action. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, Nathan, can you share with us one of your home birth stories that just you loved, a good home birth story that, maybe it's your son, because I know you said that you had one child in the hospital and one child at home. So is there a birthing story that you'd like to share?
Oh, I'll share. So both of the home birth stories that come to mind are very, very short, which is actually a reflection of how healthy the couple was and this baby was. The first is, so I have two daughters. The second is about a year and a half now. And on my wife's due date, what I call the guest date, because you really never know when a baby's coming. Her waters opened up around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. My mom was there. Her mom was there. My mom's husband, they took our toddler, took everybody to an Airbnb. We got the birth tub ready and everything. 6 o'clock rolls around and our friend Sarah, who is an effigy breath worker, shows up and starts this breathing practice for us. And about 45 minutes in, Stephanie starts tapping me And when you do like a somatic type of breath work, you know, you get this tetany, you can start to kind of dissociate from your body. And I was out in
Yeah.
outer space, but she was very grounded, and she was like, baby's coming. And we were on the bed. We weren't even in the birth tub. The birth team was there. They came up like wide eyed. And moments after she said the baby's coming, the baby was out. So we're talking less than 2 hours for this
Oh,
birth.
wow.
And Everly was just asleep on my wife's chest. And it was just the most unremarkable story from a wow factor. It was a wow birth if you've been to a handful of bad births, but this, after seeing so many births in my life, this was like the ideal sort of scenario for me. So that was one really extraordinary birth. My wife never needed any sutures, meaning no stitching in her vagina, in her vulva,
Mm-hmm.
for either birth. The other one was a couple that I attended up in, well, I won't say where, but a state nearby where I live. And they had kind of found me sort of out of desperation, because there's not a lot of midwives in their part of the world, as you know, as you might find in Idaho. And they were just super dialed in. They didn't have a lot of money. So anybody out there listening, they're like, I can't afford this. They spent their money as wisely as they could. Organ meats are the cheapest thing at the butcher shop. And if you know a hunter, you're going to be filled, because most hunters don't even use the organ meats.
No.
You know, get the liver and store it up, and that will be your nutrition for pregnancy, even if you want to be vegetarian or vegan, whatever. So they took such good care of themselves, exercising, a lot of stress management, a lot of relaxing, and just slowing down, and kind of nurturing that experience. And I went up there and stayed nearby in a friend's house in their community, which was about 4 hours away. Missed a family trip to Mexico, and I was like, I brought all my birth kits, you know, stuff, my supplies up there, and I was waiting and waiting and waiting. And then a couple days after I arrived, they were like, "Hey, we're having some contractions," and I went in and looked, and I was like, "Oh." She looked a little like had lost a little color, but I was like, she doesn't even look like she's having painful contractions. So I went home and went on a hike, and later that evening hadn't heard anything until like 8 o'clock. He had texted, and he was like, "It's time." And I was like, oh my gosh. So I was 20 minutes away. I went right to the car, jumped into the car. I was ready. And when I arrived, she was sitting on the floor holding her baby. And
What?
he was like, you're going to be surprised. And I turned the corner, and there they were. And she was just glowing. I mean, she was a little freaked out. It was like, I can't believe how fast that
Like, I
happened.
just
It
did
was
this
like
by myself with my husband.
yeah, right. So those like little fizzles, those little contractions throughout the day were actually her labor pattern. Like she was just contracting. And that is the way it goes for some people. When you can dial in your nervous system, when you're not distracted, when you're just breathing into that experience, like my wife and I were, things do tend to go better. It doesn't always, you're not entitled to that experience, but the clients that I take care of tend to have those types of births. It's really amazing. Even if I'm not actually at the birth, they'll call me up and be like, we just had this awesome thing. Sorry we didn't call you sooner. It just was so fast, and there was no complications. And that's what I love to hear. I mean, that's really the power of trying to control those factors that are controllable in your life.
Yeah. And I think, I had Thea Willette on my show. You and her should team up and do a show together. We talked about getting to the root of infertility and the unprocessed emotions around birth and parenting and all that. And she said her first child came out really easy, very easy birth. And then her second, she had several miscarriages in between. And so the second child was very stressful, or it was vice versa. I can't remember. But she said a lot of it had to do with the processed emotions, that she just wasn't, she had a lot of fear, and fear will create the body to go into restriction. Absolutely. Right. And Absolutely. So it just, like you said, you really want to work on that nervous system, especially if you're a first-time mom and you're scared, just work on what are the fears that are coming up. And so, maybe finding someone who can work with you through that. And that also will help, through the process, through your pregnancy, because fear is one of the things that will lock your whole body right up, no matter what you're doing, And so, yeah, that was that kind of came to me, because that's what I do. I work with people to release their emotions through EFT tapping and the emotion code and, certain things. And there's a lot of women. I've worked with several women actually who've had infertility issues, and I've been able to heal and clear some of the trapped emotions around their fear of being a mom. And then boom, within months, they're texting me, I'm pregnant. And I'm like, amazing. So there's definitely those layers to the onion when it comes to, infertility and birthing. And so I wanted you to talk briefly about not post-traumatic, postpartum, and what are your thoughts around that? Because I'm curious. I talked about this with Thea, and I'm really curious to hear what you have to say about it from a doctor's perspective.
Well, that postpartum period is a really, I think it's, of course, I've never had a baby. I always have to give people that caveat. They're like, what does he know? And I'm like, I just have a lot of people in my life who are talking to me in the postpartum period. And I have a lot of, I have a fertility program myself, and the people on my team are not other doctors. They're, there's a psychic medium, there's a breath worker, there's an exercise specialist, there's, a metaphysical counselor who uses art therapy, and there's a Chinese medicine practitioner. Like, all of these modalities bring a special little gift. But I would say, of all of those modalities, of course, the OB-GYNs are not the ones that are going to speak, I think, eloquently about this. I think it's the Chinese medicine practitioners that really have a beautiful way of illustrating what's happening. So you're deplete, and this is the time now to nourish yourself, right? And I'm speaking in vague terms, but that literally means stopping and slowing down. There's no badge of honor to get back in your gym and lift, a heavy deadlift or squat or something. Take the time to just be connected and to connect with your baby, yourself, your newborn self. Like, you died and you were reborn as a person who just gave birth. Your partner's gone through this. Spend those first 40 days, as we say, I would say up to 12 weeks, really, really just repleting yourself energetically, nourishing yourself through the right foods. The concept of yin and yang comes up. And when I have this course coming out, the Born Free Method, and I have an interview there. Well, it's actually a presentation, a full 30-minute presentation from my Chinese medicine doctor friend who quit her training because they were going to require her to get something injected into her arm 6 weeks from finishing. So I adore her even more, but I digress. She describes this nourishment of the yin and yang after birth, and it's actually quite complex the way that Chinese medicine views it. It's not just my vagina's healed, can I have sex now? It's actually energetically, you need to really put the pause on. And I didn't personally, and I ended up with shingles. Like, there was a lot that needed
because it's all frequency vibration based. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm a very healthy guy. But it wasn't just like, you need to sleep more. It's actually, you have to show up differently in that postpartum period. That is a time to rest, digest, to slow things down, to nourish yourself with all of the right foods, to find people to help you out. And when they say, what can I do for you? Give them something to do. Wash my lunch, walk my dog, clean my kitchen, clean my bathroom.
Make me a casserole, do something.
Yeah. And people are like, can I take the baby? And they're like, no, I'm actually bonding to the baby. I want to be with the baby. I don't have light time for any of the other life things. So
I was reading something the other day that babies don't even know that they're separate from the mom until so many months after they're born. Like, they actually still think they're a part of your energetic field. And, you talked about disassociation, which can happen during pregnancy. It can happen to anybody during trauma. Our consciousness wants to shoot out of our physical body. And I kind of feel that postpartum sometimes can be that disassociation. Like, you went through that experience and you kind of shot out, and now you need to ground yourself back in so you can have that connection with your child. And I love that you work with Chinese medicine and you have this variety of modalities, because there's so much to it than just the physical, right? We've got all these layers, the energetic, emotional, spiritual. There's so many aspects to the birthing and the death process, and just the living process. Right?
Yeah. I also want to impress upon people that there's a lot that isn't in your control. I've said this time and time again. However you had your baby, whether you had a C-section, you're hoping for a home birth, whether whatever, it doesn't really help anybody for us to be beating ourselves up. There are certain instances in which I think babies choose to come through. I think they have some say in this. And I am speaking very literally here. I'm not like, it is woo-woo, but I actually think that the babies have some sort of agenda here.
Yeah.
There was one, speaking of past trauma, I mean, trauma is this, I'm so happy that Gabor Mate's work and Mark Wallin's work and all these great authors, their work is really coming to the forefront, because we're starting to realize that when you have these hard things happen and they're not digested and integrated, that they result in some weird things happening later. There was a woman who I spoke with who had gone through a regression therapy, and she was really beating herself up over a C-section. I had this C-section. I was so determined. I did everything right. And in this regression therapy, she, I guess it was a bit of a hypnosis therapy with kind of coupled with regression, but she met her baby in the womb. The baby indicated down into the pelvis that I couldn't go through there. It's too scary.
Yeah.
And she saw it as like a dark cellar or something. And so she got from that, like, okay, the baby chose to come out of the abdomen versus going through the pelvis. But what happened in the pelvis? And through the regression therapy, she determined that oh my gosh, she had repressed some sort of really horrible sexual trauma in the past. This is real stuff that people tell me
That's
all
what
the time.
I work with all of this stuff with
Yeah.
people. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I do feel, Nikola Tesla said, if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And I personally feel that if the mother isn't at the same frequency as that child coming in, this is why I think miscarriages happen, because the child's in there and it's like, I can't hold this frequency. And then boom, they're out of there. So that's why you said it's so important, like 3 months or more prior to getting pregnant, to take care of yourself, raise your vibration, get into a state of energetic flow, so you have a good, clean, pure vessel to receive that child, because you're receiving them energetically first, and then they're going to start forming in the physical. And that's why it's so important. And I've had I do the past life, I do quantum healing hypnosis, so sometimes this will come up with people, and the child will come in and say, I couldn't maintain that frequency. I just couldn't do it, Mom. I'm sorry. It was too much for me. I'm going from this very light body into this very dense reality. And it was really hard for me. And, some people could say this is woo, but this is the reality of working in the energetic system and understanding there's more to it than, and like you said, the baby has a choice. We had a choice, when we came in, and we had a choice of who our parents would be. Right.
Yeah. And I think that kind of finding that vibrational frequency is actually through the lens of conscious conception. That is what we're talking about. We're actually inviting that baby in, and it requires you and your partner to be vibrating together. And that could mean that mechanical sex that you're having and you're wondering why sperm isn't meeting egg. It probably is meeting. It's just like the baby's like, no, guys, like, come on, let's get together. And I'll say the same goes for after. You need to integrate your birth experience. Otherwise, that can actually be held within the body as birth trauma. As I find a lot of people who even have natural unmedicated hospital births will come to me afterwards and say, something didn't feel right about that. And there's something to that. Maybe they were distracted. Maybe there was somebody who had this kind of energetic sort of abrasiveness, with wherever you were vibrating. And that's why being in your home actually does feel so much safer and sounder for so many women and their partners. So take time before, take time afterwards to really kind of dial in your health, but also your energetics, your awareness, your frequency. How are you showing up in the world? And that's going to definitely be reflected in how you give birth and how you give birth in the future.
Yeah, because each of those emotions hold a certain vibration. And that's why I say, when you are trying to conceive, have fun. The more you have fun and you make it less robotic, the more you're likely to conceive, because that baby is like, ooh, Mom and Dad are having fun. I'm coming in, this looks like a good time. I'm ready to come in. That's why when people say, oh, we tried and we tried and we tried, and then we gave up, and then boom, they get pregnant, it's because they let go of the resistance and allowed that baby to come through. And so, Nathan, this was such a fun conversation. I can't believe this hour's flown by so quickly. And I know you and I could talk about so much more, but can you share with us a little bit about all the services that you provide and how people can connect with you?
Yeah, well, thanks. I know, Tanya, I know what it's like to have a podcast and a brand, and it's always an honor to be invited on somebody else's show. So speaking of that, I do have a podcast. It's called The Holistic OB-GYN. We have a lot of conversations like this, and I actually think, you'd be a great guest in the future. So we'll have to stay in touch.
Yeah, I'd love to.
So that is really where I'm having conversations, and I'm also building out some services that I have found have been very, very needed in my community. The first is a big fertility program that is a fraction of the cost of IVF, with the goal of you either conceiving naturally or at least making it so that those complications that are associated with IVF don't happen to you. And we know that IVF is an independent risk factor for a variety of things. Nobody looked upstream, though, to help you dial in your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being through diet, movement, lifestyle, meditation, all of that stuff. It's me and 7 other people you meet with. So you can find that at belovedholistics.com. And then I've got I've got my practice as well. I do a lot of women's health, typical OB-GYN stuff, home birth, pregnancy support, and whatnot. So I do packages and one-on-one there at my website. But you can also, when is this going live, Tanya?
Today, probably today or
Oh, right
tomorrow.
on. Well, if you're listening to this in your ear holes right now, we still have a couple spots on our we have a couple of days for you to join our waitlist for the Born Free Method, which is an 8-week course to learn everything that you could possibly want to know about pregnancy and postpartum. It's for women who are going to be having babies. It's for their partners. There's a whole unit just for dads. There's a whole unit just on psychedelics and cannabis use. We go over the risks.
That's a topic in itself we didn't even cover.
I know we didn't. We can do that another time. Risks, benefits, alternatives to everything from ultrasound to C-section to prior C-section to, the dreaded ruptured uterus if you've had a C-section, home birth versus hospital birth, vitamin K, ROGAM. I mean, literally everything. This course is very, very unique. And you get 12 months with me and Sarah Rosser, who's a farm midwife down in Tennessee. We'll be doing weekly calls with you for an entire 12 months. So it's 52 calls, which would be unaffordable if you paid me for every single hour. I mean, it's just an incredible resource and a vault of other resources that you get. So if you want to join the waitlist, there's still a couple days left. Go to bornfreemethod.com. You can join the waitlist and then jump on a call with us. We are only accepting so many people into the course in the very beginning. So we're going to be hand selecting those people from Zoom calls. We'll be enrolling you right there on the call. We'll get you in, make sure that you've got one of those coveted spots.
That sounds comprehensive. And so, Nathan, do you just work in certain states or, what is your availability, I guess, for people?
Well, if you want me to attend your birth, it's obviously a little hard for me to travel to Idaho, let's say, because I live in Kentucky, because we don't know when that baby is going to come. However, there are some people that will fly me out and put me up and do all of that. Of course, if you're in driving distance of Louisville, Kentucky, I'm happy to attend your birth, especially if you don't have anybody else that's respecting your decisions and your autonomy. But if you have a midwife, I do provide a lot of collaborative care around the country. I work with midwives in about 25 states. So about half of the US states, I have a midwife there who uses me as their sort of supportive doctor. And we have very, very close contact. I answer any questions they have, any questions you have. I can write orders and labs and imaging. I can help interpret what the other doctors are saying, like all this medical legal speak. And to make sure that your wishes are honored. I help with birth planning and all of that. So if you have any doubts, just go to my website. Anybody can book a free discovery call, and I'm happy to answer any questions about anything that I do. I just want to make sure that I get myself out to as many people as possible without running myself into the ground.
Absolutely. And so one last question, if someone is in search of a midwife, what is some advice that you have for them to find one?
There are a couple really, really great ways, I think. First off, if you reach out to me, I've got a big network of midwives that I trust. And I'm not going to charge you for that. You just reach out and I'll say, in Idaho, let's see who I got. I've got plenty of midwives, for example, in Texas. I have like 12 that I'm helping out down there in various parts of that giant state.
What about internationally? Because I know I have a lot of international listeners as well.
I have a couple people who we just welcomed twins in Australia. There was a couple out there who actually hired me to provide them with some direct support as they were going through their twins birth, and they just had their babies 2 days ago. So as far as collaborating with midwives around the world, I do that. The problem is that most midwives around the world are so autonomous in their practice. They don't even need doctors to sign off on orders and whatnot. But if you're out there and you're a birth worker and you want to have some insights from me based on what I've talked about, I'm happy to have anybody in that collaborator program, or to be supportive for you if you're going to be pregnant in the future. If you're a future dad, I do a lot of counseling for dads.
Which is so needed.
My God, that is becoming 50% of my time, Tanya. I shit you not. It's like, it was so important in the Born Free Method to include a unit for dads, because I felt, even as an OB-GYN, I felt completely clueless as to what I was doing in this transformation, this archetypal transformation that I was about to go through. So I'm here for you guys. Just find me at belovedholistics.com or at bornfreemethod.com if you want the course.
Great. Well, thank you, Nathan. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your information and your transparency today. I really appreciate all that you're doing in the world. This is definitely an area, like you said, we are paving our own way, right? And it sounds like you're doing a really great job of it. So thank you for coming on the show and sharing all of your wisdom around this topic today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Tanya. I really appreciate it.
You deserve to navigate your life in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.theexistentialempath.com.